So I'm glad to be here with you today. So what I'm going to do, in looking at this entire thread and this entire track, it seemed to be more about business models and not so much about technology, but can we make a sustainable, profitable business out of this as operators? And so my customers are 100% operators. They can be anywhere in the world. They'll tend to be in Middle East, in Eastern Central Europe, CIS states, Western Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, so they could be anywhere, and Latin America. And so what I've tried to focus on here was to see if I could bring some sort of commonalities from all of these different countries and all of these different operators, and provide some benefit by trying to bring it all into one place and see if their stories help to enlighten some, because there's a lot of very interesting activity happening overseas in the developing world, in different countries of the world. In a way, the most interesting things, the most activity, and a lot of the investment is happening outside of the typical countries that we tend to think of. So my focus I'm going to try to do is, it's pretty well established that video can be a profitable business model for operators. I think we're past the question of can they do it, can they not do it. It has been established, it's growing rapidly. So we're seeing video and data services and mobile data being the drivers that are replacing the declining voice and SMS revenues in operators. So the specific question I'd like to try to focus on today and then get some discussion around would be, is this something that we see that's a transitional, temporary kind of phenomenon, or is this growth of video as a source of margin and a source of revenue growth, replacing traditional voice, something that's a sustainable long-term opportunity for operators? So one of the things that's just really exploded, even in the 5 years I've been at Huawei, I've been with video over IP for 20 years, and there's nothing truly new in the entire game, but over the last few years, with the deployment of wireless over the last 10 years globally, the deployment of smart IP devices, smartphones and tablets, and the cost reductions on those in the last few years, we've seen now that multi-screen has become a typical commonplace environment for viewing, that people now there'll be about an estimate of over 900 million smartphones shipped globally this year. That means this is more than just a mainstream device, and not just in the West. And we see a lot of tablets as well, PCs, over-the-top set-top boxes, traditional set-top boxes, some bit of connected TVs. But what we can see here is there's no specific overall dominant device. There's a range of devices now, and that's become the new normal. And on the flip side, we see with the bandwidth that we have constant advances in compression. So I've seen it go from MPEG-1 to MPEG-2, which enabled cable and satellite, and then the shipment of H.264 in 2004, 2005 enabled operators, telcos, to get into the business, because it was required for them to have a H.264 type compression to be able to get multiple simultaneous channels through a copper DSL network connection over the last mile. So that was another important transition. And now we're seeing DASH and HEVC as new, continually improved compression algorithms, as well as scalable bitrate encoding and very highly commutative type of adaptive networks and things like that, being able to increasingly get amazing amounts of quality of experience over either less infrastructure or the same amount of infrastructure, which is important because video has the challenge of being a data type that's maybe 100 times or more voluminous in terms of packets than any other kind of data. But you still have limits in terms of how much money you can charge for it. So it becomes necessary to try to really carefully understand it, as well as to earn margin and money off of it in any way possible. So what we see is that our typical customer is an operator that could be in any part of the world, but if I want to, they tend to be larger telcos, but that could mean anywhere from 30 million subs up to several hundred millions of subs. But what's typical about them is they're either in one country or often in multiple countries, and they tend to be more of a collection of different access networks. So they will always have both fixed and wireless. They often will have cable as well, and sometimes they also have DTH. And so what their requirements are is really how can they try to leverage this infrastructure to deliver a consistent set of services across it, irrespective of whether it's the wireless or the wireline, whether it's copper or fiber or cable network if it's on some coax or some DTH, and get a consistent experience. And at the same time, realizing that often they'll either have a variety of different ways that video is available to customers in their region, or in some cases they'll have free-to-air or typically or commonly pirated content where people might have free satellite because they're pirating the cards and it's just part of the culture, or there's a free ad-supported television as well, either DTT or satellite. And so on that part, we found that they tend to want to have hybrid in the set-top box, and this has the double effect of allowing them to provide some bundling and ability to monetize even if and compete against a free competitor because they can have a consistent subscription price, and once they have that, then there's some value added and stickiness into putting as much of the bundle in it as possible, and there's a value to doing that to their customers because they're putting together a unified consumer experience. So there's maybe one program guide that's accessing content, whether it be from the internet, over an IP network, or a satellite receiver, or a DVB-C, or another kind of receiver. And then the other part is going from that hybrid to pull in video from all possible sources to being able to output it to any possible way of viewing it, which is just a multi-screen. So this is really becoming a very conventional kind of requirement kind of situation, whether it's in small or medium or large countries or single country or multi-country operators. So that's kind of the landscape that we're seeing. In terms of how they, now how do they use this to try to make money, and can they do it in a way that's sustainable? And we see four kind of typical categories of ways that this is being done. And the first one, and possibly the most powerful, is the bundling. That if we look at what is unique that an operator has, that say OTT competitors don't have, if I look at what do they have that can't be matched or trumped by, say, a Netflix or another OTT provider coming in over the top of their network, it would be that anybody who wants to get to their consumers, including the OTT people, need to go out over their last mile network, because even an OTT provider who wants to own the consumer experience and wants to own the billing relationship needs that wire or that frequency to get their content to the customer. And so what that provides now is an opportunity for the operator who owns that last mile to provide some bundling where they can give away the bit for free in the bundle that the OTT provider is charging for and do a variety of other things. And we're seeing as an example here where, let's see, PCCW is doing bundling of services to, let's see, sorry, my neck is having trouble looking up here. Let me look this way and point this way. So the financial impact, if we look at, say, an example in Hong Kong of PCCW, they're finding where they can bundle of their broadband and their video of getting a higher margin on their content than their competition are. If I look at China Telecom, they're finding that it helps them increase their ARPU because at the same time as they're decreasing their customer churn, which is the same experience also that AT&T has had with Uverse in the US, where Randall Stevenson, their CEO, has commented in their financial statements that if AT&T manages to get one of their subscribers to touch the video service, to get the video service as part of the bundle, that their churn rate drops essentially to zero, which is a huge item for an operator where churn can typically be a problem. So a second area is to differentiate more on content. And since many of my customers are in smaller countries in a variety of different languages, a big part of that is to create local programming. And so if I look at what their needs are right now, the technology is fairly well understood today. And it's more about the business model. And so if they look at the content, which they're now moving into, it would be a combination of their two highest priorities would be American movies that are translated into their local language and local programming that's developed from the beginning in their local language to identify local storytellers, local people with production expertise, local financing, and in some places global financing that wants access to this particular country. So there's some very new interesting business models that emerge, and as this content becomes more local and specialized, it also is providing some competitive protections and differentiation with the operators. So, because what we're seeing now with the over-the-top providers, there's a variety of business models, but what they tend to do is there's some limitations, because they'll tend to be coming in generically over the network. So their advantage is that they don't have to lay down any infrastructure. They can pretty much turn on an entire region and come into it, provide services across it, where they, on the other hand, those strengths turn into weaknesses is in terms of having less local access to the customer, less local understanding of the marketplace, the fact that they're not owning the wire, so they can't provide a comprehensive view and a comprehensive experience to the customer. So in essence, the weakness of OTT is that it fragments the customer's experience, and the operator's opportunity by owning the wire is they have the ability to reintegrate that experience back together because they have the big picture of the customer. An example here of also this kind of co-opetition, if you will. China Unicom and one of the OTT providers in China have developed a revenue share model where they're able to cooperate to try to provide a more value-added service for a higher price within China and then split the revenue between them with a revenue share model. So again, the idea is for operators to be creative and to understand the tools that they have to work with to create opportunities for themselves, to generate stronger margin, to generate more revenue, and not take for granted any particular view of the world or any particular position that any marketing person would tell them who's got a particular agenda that they're coming for, but look at it in terms of what they provide, who they are, what their needs are, and how they can leverage their strengths cleverly to maintain their direct relationship with their customers and use anybody else who comes over their network as an opportunity to maybe generate some new B2B business models or in other ways to monetize that. Another case, and the fourth one, is increasingly other kinds of applications. So once we've put in, or a customer has put in with our help, a digital system which has storefront and purchasing, the ability to do marketing, customer management, currency conversions in some case, that service, those servers, those applications can be used for other applications and other vertical application areas as well because it's all just digital applications. So one example who's an early pioneer with this is Guangdong Telecom. So they're a part of China Telecom. They currently have more than 3 million IPTV subscribers, classical managed network IPTV, and they've been actively differentiating into other kinds of applications of games and other sorts of applications, and at this point have managed to now generate an incremental additional 12% on their revenue based on application revenue as opposed to data or video entertainment revenue. So, and I'll mention related to this, the kinds of business models would be that when the operators see what leverage they have and what they don't have, they're also able to do some things like in the US, we're seeing content companies like ESPN that are coming to AT&T, and they're saying, well, if we pay you some money additionally, then make it so we go around your bandwidth caps and don't count against the bandwidth cap of your subscribers. So again, what these open up, as long as the regulatory environment allows tiering, price tiering, bandwidth shaping, and other kinds of management like this, is there's a B2B opportunity that opens up between the operator also and the content providers to be able to build both another revenue stream for the operator, as well as to increase the operating costs of the OTT providers that otherwise are leveraging the infrastructure and taking most of the profit for themselves. So I've tried to make this part short to open up for some Q&A and get some discussion, but some of the observations that we've got then are that video, we do see globally across all kinds of different operators, has become a critical part for uplifting their revenue. So really, they are making a strategic change, a strategic transformation of becoming media providers, application providers, in addition to data providers and infrastructure providers, and developing that expertise in-house, whether it be by acquiring small video aggregators to bring that in, or acquiring broadcast companies like recently Vodafone purchased Cable Deutschland, or we've seen América Móvil buying a small aggregator in Latin America to build up and extend their capabilities and increase their knowledge, their different kinds of knowledge and knowledge base internally, as well as moving into different applications. So in addition to entertainment, we're seeing now applications in education. A huge area right now is also point-of-care health, and all of these now are able to be deployed on the existing network because it's IP, all the infrastructure is there for the monitoring and the back end and the quality of service. So it's a very interesting opportunity and a time right now. So to then just summarize a set of observations that are what we hear from our customers and then try to share in terms of best practices across them, is that there's a strong ability to bundle video and broadband or video, broadband, and other services to increase the ARPU at the same time as reducing churn. Also, that adding applications and content are a very effective way to differentiate from the competition. And it's important to do it in a way that's not just simply purchasing commodity content or bringing in third-party OTT services, because by their very nature, there's no differentiation to do those, so the value is going to the remote provider and not to the operator. And then secondly, there's ways of turning the OTT from a competitor to a partner. So some examples of these is that operators in the past have found that they're in a difficult position because an OTT provider or OTT service will deliver a tremendous load of video bits, of packets onto their network that goes to their customers. And at the same time, if the video quality is insufficient or has difficulties, that customer will call up and complain to the operator, not to the over-the-top provider. And so it's also eliminated any incentive for the over-the-top provider to pay any money or see any value to pay money to the operator in return for a higher quality of carriage of bits. What we're seeing now, if we add to that mix the idea of bandwidth shaping and tiered pricing and bandwidth caps, is a situation such as I mentioned with AT&T and ESPN, where if I want to watch in my home where I have UVerse and also unlimited data from AT&T Mobile, that I can get video onto my devices, but there's still a bandwidth cap. And if I'm getting an OTT service like Netflix or ESPN Go or something else coming in, HBO Go, then that counts against my bandwidth caps, and very soon I'm up against that and looking at paying overage charges. And so it's opened up now a new business model where the premium content providers, ESPN in the first example, are coming back and doing deals with AT&T, where in return for a payment from the content provider to the operator, that content provider's content, over-the-top content, is no longer charged against the bandwidth cap of the customer. So it's again an example of now how the operator, even if they can't get more revenue from their user, is able to get more revenue, a new revenue path from the content provider itself, and overall provide a higher quality of service. And then secondly, expanding a range of TV apps to diversify revenue sources. Probably a lot of that enablement is through wireless and how ubiquitous it's come globally. And so we're seeing not only the entertainment and the video applications, but point-of-care health has become a really dynamic area right now, as well as education. Gaming is becoming very popular with a very high ARPU in certain regions that we have, particularly the Middle East. And then most importantly, probably in general sense, would be remembering that the operator has control of the last mile network, and that it's very important to look at the value of that and use the value of that and remember the value of that in order to manage competition coming in over your network, and also how you go and maybe offensively use over the top over your competitors' networks and their broadband customers to generate incremental revenue as leveraging other people's infrastructure, as well as looking at those as ways of marketing and converting people over to your own service. And then lastly, that we're seeing in many countries that the local knowledge within that country may be more important than global scale. So for example, when I was in Southeast Asia about a month and a half ago, and they're facing how they can generate new revenue in countries between, say, 40 and 90 million people, how they can generate new revenue, how they can differentiate and defend against Facebook and YouTube and other similar services coming in and wanting to start pulling the ad revenue out of the country, and realizing that in that kind of situation that the scale that a YouTube has or the scale that a Facebook has really don't apply so much within that country, because it doesn't matter if I'm in a particular country how much scale these operations have globally. It only matters what I have in country. So they're realizing from that there's an opportunity to retain that revenue in country, the advertising revenue in country, as well as use the reach they have because of mobile with their customer bases to be able to attract direct, attractive deals with the content providers, and increasingly attract direct deals with consumer packaged goods companies that are moving into their countries as their next wave of growth. So going back then to the original agenda, our view from looking and working with these customers is that it does appear that video services as a way of replacing declining voice and SMS services and of providing a growth that would more than compensate for the loss of those and give additional growth and continued growth can include video in a long-term and sustainable way, and that the operators are in a strong position to do that. So with that, I'd open it up, and I haven't been keeping track of the exact time or how we're doing, but if we do have time for a few questions, I'd be happy to take them, or I've put my contact information up here and would be happy also to answer any questions after the fact as well.